Folks, welcome to the October 21st edition of the Employer Handbook Zoom Office Happy Hour, where today we are talking about employee mental health and well-being and success stories. My name is Eric Meyer. I am the proprietor of the Employer Handbook blog, and I'm also a partner in the employment practice group at Fisher Broyles. With me today, a familiar face, one of my favorite guests, Amy Epstein Gluck. Amy serves as employment counsel to Fisher Broyles, and as partner, she advises employers about anti-discrimination laws and workplace safety policies and retaliation and workplace culture and the alphabet soup of federal and state employment laws. She litigates, she counsels, but today she's going to be talking about a little bit of legal, but mostly our efforts internally to promote employee mental health and well-being and what you can take away from that and put into your workplace. Amy, I've said a lot, but feel free to add to it. How's it going?
Hey. Hi, Eric. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see some of you who I know. Shout out to Justin's dad, Jack. Hopefully Joyce is there with him. It's nice to be here as usual. As Eric said, I am an employment lawyer and a litigator. I basically am Eric in female form in the DC area instead of in Pennsylvania and Jersey. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And the fresh face we have today is my partner, Justin Nahama. Justin is a passionate and highly accomplished leader, business strategist, and attorney committed to creating impact for all. He's got 15 years of experience leveraging a unique blend of legal business and nonprofit acumen to help scale the global reach of industry leaders and early stage companies. He is not an employment lawyer, but he has worked closely with disruptive visionaries ranging from Deepak Chopra, perhaps you've heard of him. He's Oprah's executive director. He was on CrossFit's founding team. He's leadership in the Navy SEALs and special operations communities. He works with the autism community. He works with professional athletes, crypto, blockchain, orthopedic surgeons. Wow, you've got a lot on your LinkedIn bio. I'm not going to get through all of it, Justin. But I do want to say that I met Justin in person. We are a distributed remote law firm. I met Justin for the first time in person a month or so ago in Nashville, and he blew me away with his humility and his authenticity. And you guys are in for a treat over the next 57 minutes. So Justin, welcome to the Zoom happy hour. How you doing today?
I'm great, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I feel really grateful that I've just been fortunate enough to learn from some communities that have kind of had to walk the talk with mental health, between the special operations community and the military, parents navigating challenges for kids when they have a disability or challenge, and then of course the work that Deepak and his foundation are doing. So really excited to share some themes that I've observed over the years with everyone.
And I'm going to get right back to you in a second on that, because I'd love to hear about some of what you've done with Deepak and the Chopra Foundation, because I think our audience hopefully can apply some of that in their workplace. But before I do that, let me get through a couple other housekeeping measures. First, if you're watching us on YouTube, because we are recording this, thank you. Give us a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you can be alerted when new videos upload. And thank you. Leave a comment too. You can also, if you're doing this live on Zoom, make sure that you're chatting with us, right? We have everyone muted. We have all your video turned off, but you can talk with us. Give us a shout out. If you have any questions, we're happy to answer them. Please use the chat feature. Also, if you're with us on Zoom today and you need closed captioning, we can turn closed captioning on for you. That's the three dots in the bottom right-hand corner. Just let me know. We can turn on the transcript. If it's already on, I might have turned it on already, and you don't need to see the transcript floating across the screen. You can just hide the subtitle. Here we go. We're enabling it right now. And if you don't need to see the transcript floating across the screen, you can just go down to the bottom right-hand corner, click the three dots, and click on Hide Subtitle. All right. Oh, this wouldn't be three attorneys doing a live session without some kind of attorney disclaimer. So Justin and Amy and I are attorneys, but we're not your attorneys, although technically I see some clients in here. But for the next 54 minutes, you are not our clients. We're not your attorneys. We are not giving legal advice. We are not creating attorney-client privilege. We're just three folks who are conducting a free Zoom, and you should not take free legal advice because it's not legal advice from a Zoom. So if you have questions, call your lawyers when this is done, okay? Let them bill a few hours. All right, disclaimer out of the way. Justin, I got to hear about it. Tell me about some of your experience with mental health and well-being, especially, let's start with Deepak and the Chopra Foundation.
Yeah, sure. So I met Deepak a few years before COVID kind of happened, and had the opportunity to be his attorney on a few matters, and was really intrigued, just based on kind of looking under the hood with everything he's done in his career as one of the disruptive visionaries with well-being. He's an endocrinologist by trade, but kind of walked away from the traditional practice of medicine because he felt that more could be accomplished through consciousness and well-being. And so the foundation, there's been some changes in the wake of COVID to kind of reorient to serve the world where it's at now. And there's a few core programs we have, but to kind of summarize, the thing that we're most passionate about is trying to flip the script from reactive mental health. So something happens and then we're scrambling to figure out how to solve it, to proactive well-being. How do we light the path to joy for all? And one of the things I've been thinking a lot about lately, Eric, too, is even the notion of starting with the word mental health. I think we have to be careful there because in some ways it inherently suggests that something's wrong. And so if we're always operating from a place that something's wrong, it's a lot more difficult to kind of turn the corner and get to a place where we're really trying to find that proactive path to joy and happiness. And so we're trying to change the vocabulary where, of course, mental health is part of it, but whenever possible, we like to use well-being to try to have that positive frame of reference. And so we're really excited. Our core program is called Never Alone. We have some education, we have some technology. We're also ramping up research to show the power on health and well-being of things like mindfulness, meditation. We're doing some research into the frontier of psychedelic assisted therapy to navigate trauma and other more challenges. And so it's a really, really challenging time, but fun time to be of service to the world.
Speaking of well-being, we've had some major societal events over the past 2 or 3 years. I'm thinking COVID and the microscope, or I guess I should say the magnifying glass for well-being that this has done. Have you thought about that and how that's impacted your efforts, these societal forces that really shine a magnifying glass on well-being?
I have, and I'll only speak for myself. But I think one of the things with COVID is the traditional outlets that we had to be able to distract ourselves from taking care, of ourselves went away. So rather than going out and finding more work excuses or doing social things, we were kind of stuck with ourselves more than ever. And I don't think a lot of people loved that. I know I didn't at first. And so I think when you look, it's the first time in my life where every direction I turn, there's some type of painful experience going on, whether it's political or war or other things. And so I think it's a very charged world right now, and it's bringing a lot of the mental health challenges to the surface.
And you have experience, I talked about it in the intro, but I see it on my outline here, with veterans, Navy SEALs, and special operations communities. Tell us a little bit about some of your efforts to promote well-being there.
Sure. So the short version is, and Amy knows this and promised she wouldn't fire me. I stumbled my way into being an attorney. My dad, who's actually on the call, was scheduled to be in the towers on 9/11. He wasn't, but wound up going into the military. The military funneled me to law school. And so after I served in the Marines as a federal prosecutor and went to a law firm, it was really important to me to stay connected to the veteran community. And so I started bringing in foundations and veteran entrepreneurs as pro bono clients. One of those foundations that I'm still general counsel for, that I'm very proud of, is called the Honor Foundation. Honor.org is the website. And we are the largest transition institute in the world for Navy SEALs, Green Berets, Marine Raiders, and special operators. And at first, we started off more as a job placement organization. And then we realized that we kind of got it wrong. And what we started doing, and I think this applies to anybody, not just special operators and veterans, is we started untangling who people are from what they did. And we realized that that was one of the most important keys to kind of lighting that path to well-being. And so now we're just about 9 years into the Honor Foundation. We've impacted over 2,000 special operations families, and it's still near and dear to my heart to stay connected to the veteran community and make sure that, you know, the folks in harm's way and their families have access to whatever well-being resources they need.
That's fantastic. And then you're involved as well in autism research, and you founded a company called Neurolux. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Probably the hardest chapter of my life as an employee, as a young associate coming up through the firm ranks, was being a single parent, and my now 12-year-old son is on the autism spectrum. And so the first few years of his life were very, very challenging to kind of recalibrate after that diagnosis and figure out how to support him. And I did a horrible job of managing that at work. I felt like no one could know. I felt guilty for leaving the office at 5 or 6 at night. And so I really learned a lot of lessons the hard way, I'll call it there. And it was important to me that no family impacted by autism feels what I felt and went through that process of not knowing how to get resources and manage work and everything in between. And so with some partners a lot smarter and impactful, you know, than I am, created Neurolux to create a comprehensive family assessment to help them figure out how to better navigate their journey if they have a son or daughter impacted by autism.
I'm going to put you on the spot because this is usually a topic that Amy or I would be called upon to address from an HR standpoint in terms of something you just touched on, balancing that work-life balance, right? And so from your standpoint, the non-employment lawyer here, do you have some tips or advice for the people here on the Zoom as to how to enable your employees to establish that work-life balance, especially when they're dealing with, you know, health issues, whether mental health or otherwise, with loved ones at home?
Sure. You know, I touched on it before, but I'll go a layer deeper. I think one of the most interesting things about being a professional is a lot of businesses talk about culture, but it kind of stops at the front door, you know, when people come in for their work day. And I think it's really important to, you know, have, I'll call it gentle curiosity about the difference between who we are and what we do. If you ask most people, tell me about yourself, they'll usually tell you what they do. And it really has nothing to do with who they are. And a huge part of who we are is, especially if we're parents, is our kids. But, you know, at work, I'll speak for myself, it's usually the kind of like highlight reel water cooler conversation about how soccer or sports went. People don't talk about the hard stuff. And so I think to answer your question directly, Eric, for the leaders on the call, it's taking care of your team and creating this space. Amy does an amazing job with this. I don't know how she does it with so many people, but she calls and she checks in, and she has that like mom, I'll call it like woo-woo radar, where she knows when something's up and just asks. So, you know, on the other hand, I think there has to be some boundaries at work, you know, as well, which are a little bit different than at home. But it's one of the things that the military actually does a great job of, where the best leaders who are senior, you know the, you know, your kids' names and what they're doing and family challenges, because if you ignore that stuff and pretend it's not there, you can't be ready to accomplish the mission. And I think it's the same thing at work. If you really want to optimize performance of your team, we kind of have to stop, not kind of, we do have to stop pretending that people don't have lives when they, you know, leave the office, or now, you know, I guess at the virtual office as well.
Your woo-woo radar, yours, Justin, is on point right now, because I have in my outline right at this point ask Amy about the obligation that leaders have to lead by example when it comes to well-being. So I'm going to flip it over to Amy and have her talk a little bit about that.
I love that. I love that. It's more of a spidey sense. My spidey sense tingles. For those of you who are of a certain age, you know what I'm talking about. My spidey sense tingles when I sense a disturbance in the forest with some of my people. How do we lead by example? I think it's so important that we we communicate authentically with each other. And kind of my goal is kind of like getting in between the lines here, right? I mean, we are a cloud-based law firm and we all work remotely. And I think that part of my job as employment counsel for the firm, you know, and making sure that I'm dealing with all the employment issues correctly for you HR people on the phone, you know, that's what I'm doing for the firm. But also to see how our 300 partners are doing, you know, as you know, it's not just, we're all partners. So all of our lawyers are partners. You know, we're all sitting in our offices, in our homes, or in spaces that we rented. So, you know, when we talk about mental wellness or well-being, we're really talking about, as Justin said, the whole person. And the only way I know how to do that, right, is by talking to my people and by saying, okay, you're good. Tell me what that means for you. Okay, you're overwhelmed. Let's break that down and let's talk about that. Or when you call me and you say to me on a Monday, Amy, how was your weekend? And most people would say it was fine. I actually tell you how my weekend was. And, you know, half the time it was good. And the other half of the time there was some issue with one of my 3 kids or in my life, you know, because I have parents, I have 3 children, I have a mortgage, I have a business, I have a blog that I don't write enough of, you know, I'm employment counsel to a firm. So the only way I know of to get people to open up and to really explain what they're going through or what they need help with is by doing it myself.
So I had my woo-woo alarm went off and I'm thinking to myself, okay, we have our managers who, you know, we want them to do the best that they can, and we train them on EEO and anti-harassment, but are we nervous about them having conversations with their direct reports about topics that kind of drift into mental health and well-being? Because all of a sudden, you know, the lawyer in me is like, well, what if there is a lawsuit down the line under the Americans with Disabilities Act, or what if there's a
100%.
Family Medical Leave Act issue? Are we going to be prepared to deal with this?
Yeah, 100%. What I work with our lawyers who are supervisors, and I work with my clients and your clients and other people's clients on is recognizing when somebody may have, and I'm going to use the word disability, like a mental health disability, because that's what we use under the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's what we use. We use serious serious health condition under the FMLA, right? It's recognizing when somebody is making the request for a possible reasonable accommodation, and it's time to open up the interactive process. So recognizing that request, so you can go to HR, and HR will really work through that process with or without the manager, with or without the supervisor, depending on what, you know, what's going on with the person. The interactive process is highly individualized. It's an individual assessment of what the person's issues are. And it really is something that HR professionals and people who are trained to manage the process should be doing. I don't want a supervisor saying to an employee, hey, you really must have ADHD. Like, let's talk about that. Then you get that regarded as lawsuit going on. So we don't want that. So I really work with people to recognize, that somebody's saying, that somebody's saying, I changed my medication, may be time to contact your HR department to kind of open up that process.
But it's also okay too, and this is something we're going to get at more, for our managers to be empathetic,
Of
to
course,
show concern
of
and
course.
talk to our direct reports and promote their well-being, right? I mean,
Yeah,
there's a line that we don't want them to cross, to play doctor, of course, and to completely ignore any sort of what I'll call HR compliance ramifications. But at the same time, their job is to manage, and that should mean managing with hopefully compassion.
yeah, yeah. That is, to me, key. As an employment lawyer navigating people through COVID, I hear all the time about problems that managers and employers are having with their employees. And you really have to break that down. It's not necessarily a bad employee. What we see a lot of the times, it's an employee who's struggling, and managers who aren't asking questions about the basis of that struggle. It's the idea of not wanting to put a Band-Aid on a situation, but finding the cause, right? And you can really best do that by sitting down with people and saying, hey, what's going on? I've noticed this. I keep it factual. I've noticed this. Is there something I can do to help? How can I help? That type of thing. And the reason, I started a group within our firm was because I found that when I would talk to people one-on-one on the phone, that everybody was struggling. People were struggling. People were isolated. Nobody really wanted to talk about it. And I knew that if I could get people on a Zoom as opposed to a room, because we are not in the same physical space, and I could really be vulnerable and real about my and my family's experience with mental health, that I could kind of lift up all boats there. I think I'm mixing metaphors, but you get the idea.
Eric, can I add one point there too, just from the litigator's perspective?
Yes,
on
please.
your question?
Please.
One of the things that I've seen too, and I'm not doing as much litigation these days, but for the little bit that I am, is if you have a disgruntled former employee, they're going to bootstrap them being unhappy with some type of discrimination claim. And pretty much, as far as, at least in my opinion, the pleading standards for filing a lawsuit, you can claim someone has a mental health challenge and they were discriminated against based on that, with pretty much pixie dust and nothing more. And so I think, to your point, which is a great one, to protect companies about having these conversations, in some ways it can actually help. So if it's happening, it's not a surprise, and at least you have some sense of what's going on, rather than being completely ambushed by it when you receive a demand letter from someone as well. So it's not just kind of tiptoeing through minefields of not wanting to open that door. I think there's actually a benefit to it. To me, the human being piece is the most important. But then on top of that, if you're in a leadership role, there are advantages as well to having those conversations, so the company, is not completely caught off guard if someone genuinely is hurting.
Of course. And we talk about that as really a first step. I mean, without the conversation and then documenting the conversation, it's like it doesn't exist. And more and more, I just told Sherm this, what I see rising in terms of disabilities more in the last 2.5 years since COVID is mental health disabilities, right? And if you have a conversation and you don't document it, you're going to get that failure to engage in the interactive process, fail to accommodate, that type of thing. So it's so critical from an EPLI standpoint, to your point, that's just employment practices, litigation, insurance, to be able to do that. So it's the perfect human being response, as well as mitigating risk, which we all, of course, want to do for our companies.
I see a comment in the chat, and folks, feel free to utilize the chat to communicate with us. I see a question that we're going to get to eventually too, but if you have questions, comments, you can send them to everyone. You can send them directly to me. I'll make sure they get asked. Wendy says, the law firm I worked for specialized in past tense, specialized in giving out assignments on Friday afternoons due Monday. This was typical for firms where billing hours is key. there's such a gap between the wonderful things you're describing versus the goals I used to have to bill X thousand hours a month. How do we get away from the tyranny of the billable hour?
Yeah, that's well, join our firm, right? Because we don't have the billable hour. We don't have the billable hour, but it's training. It's training, y'all. It's really training. Like, we just had our firm retreat in Nashville, and I sat down with every single partner who has an employee to do training. I have a couple of clients on this call whose workplaces I've walked into or Zoomed into, where, I've taught this and taught, training in terms of creating psychological safety among their teams, communicating authentically among their teams, letting people feel valued and heard among their teams. So education, training, I find that the biggest pitfall, that really occurs is in that middle management tier, when the frontline supervisor isn't trained appropriately. For people, I see this all the time on Fridays with people, for anxiety to get a Friday 5 o'clock assignment, that often sends people through the roof, and that's really a conversation. Law firms can be brutal, and not to toot our horn, but that's why our model is so amazing. We don't have billable hours at all. We eat what we kill. So, I can't fix big law, but I can make our law firm the best I know how.
All right, Amy, you alluded to it earlier, our happy hour. Please, this is your baby. It's wonderful achievement, both for law firms generally and for our law firm specifically. Not that we were curmudgeons and cretins beforehand, but it just shows that we are on the cutting edge in terms of not just how we practice law, but in terms of how we treat our best resources, which are our lawyers and our support staff. Tell us a little bit about happy hour.
Well, I have always been a proponent of conversations, of real talk. And one of the reasons Justin and I first connected on a personal level is because I was very open and vulnerable in a blog post, right? It's no surprise to anyone who knows me that my son was born with no vision at all. And he's fine now, y'all. Nobody have a heart attack. His vision came in, but he is incredibly myopic, major vision issues there. And my middle one deals with ADHD and autism like Justin's son, but she wasn't diagnosed till recently as a 20-year-old, as girls often are. A lot of the times girls are diagnosed late. So for the last 17 years, I've really been dealing with a lot of triggers for both myself and my family. And I developed tools and ways in order to cope with them and to be successful and to be proactive instead of just reactive, so that I could continue to be a litigator, be an employment lawyer, be a wife, be a mom, be a friend, be a daughter, be a sister, be a sister-in-law, be an aunt. Those are all things that are really important to me, right? And when I'm connected with someone, and the two of you know it because we are connected like that on an emotional level, like I'm your friend forever. Like, I'm loyal till the end. So when I was thinking about that, and I kind of would see people suffering. Oh, thank you, Natasha. When I would see people suffering, and I would talk to them on the phone, I was thinking, this is not fine. This is not fine. And I know people will feel better to talk about it. And I, as a leader in our firm, as employment counsel, right, as management, really, who else is going to do it, right? It's like when celebrities disclose their mental health almost, or take a knee or protest racism or something. Like, you if you were in a position of power, I think you need to use that in order to elevate other people and shine a light on things that people may be scared to speak up about themselves. So Justin actually came up with the name, which I found amazing. I was debating, different names. Let's talk, let's talk about it. Talking is good, different things. And happy in quotes, it plays to my snarky and sarcastic sense of humor. Like, it's not 5 o'clock happy hour. There are no drinks involved. It's noon once a month, which I started out as, and I really have had no expectations of it. I really didn't know if I'd have one person or 20 or 50. And I just started, and I explained that I think that not only, the law part aside, but, COVID, I've been writing about mental health for, I don't know, close to a decade, and trying to help employers deal with mental health issues for their employees. But I felt like I needed to do that there. And as leaders, I really had an obligation to go first and explain my history, which some people knew and some people didn't, and that did create a sense of safety for other people to kind of make their own disclosures and share. Like, there are people I've never seen get on that call. I've been at this room for 7 years, who tell me about their sense of isolation during COVID, or talk to me about these different issues and share with the group. And I said it in the blog yesterday, I really wouldn't have felt comfortable as a woman, as a woman over 40, with disabilities and this and that, to have done that. If our general counsel at our firm hadn't opened up about his struggles. And that really gave me the sense that, oh, I'm not going to be seen as less as if I open up, so that's really why I did it. And it's someplace that we are free to share our mental health journeys and challenges, whether it's with ourselves or our children. I get a mix each time I have it. I usually go in with a theme, whether sometimes it's sleep, and do you sleep, and why aren't you sleeping, and what do you use, what kind of tips and tricks do you use? Sometimes it's meditation, and I talk about my struggles with meditation. Very hard for me to sit and breathe. I talk about breathing, I talk about exercising with friends in nature, and why that's so beneficial. And I always come in with something I want to say or something I want to read. And I would say half the time it's really just people sharing. And then I get a million emails after saying how helpful that was. And I'm very careful, right? I'm not a therapist. I'm not trained as one. I did not go to any school for that. But I know what I went through, and I know how I feel, and I know what I struggle with. So I think, as a leader, it's really my obligation to let people see me in that way too. Everybody's struggling, and I want to just create a safe space for people to know that that's true. It's not just them.
Yeah, and I hearing what you're saying and having attended a couple of these, never has anyone been asked, how are you doing this week with your PTSD? Or
right.
What is your disability? I mean, of course,
absolutely.
I want that to be, it's obvious to me, but I want to be obvious to the audience. So if folks are thinking about implementing something like this in their workplace, and I think it would go great, especially in a hybrid or remote workforce where you lack that connection, that in-person connection with someone. It's very much just doing something that lets people feel better and feel like they're not the only one having issues.
I did a lot of research before I did this. And what I said to people was that it's totally voluntary. We want this to be a safe place, and to the extent possible, confidential. I don't talk to anyone else about who was there or what they said. And I mean that, even with my closest friends, not even who was there. And I tell other people that I don't record it as a Zoom. A couple of people have asked me if I'm recording it, and I'm very specific. And, by saying I'm not here as a manager, I'm not here as employment counsel, and I'm not here. It's not a requirement. I use the adage from AA. I say, what you see here, what you hear here, what you say here, let it stay here, which I think, resonates. So that is really important. It was really important to the firm that I not be providing therapy, which I wouldn't want to do. And I'm very clear that, you may just be curious. You may not be struggling with anything. It may be your family, maybe it's your spouse, your child. I want people to know how to access the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program, and what that entails. So it's not a one size fits all for well-being, and it's not a one size fits all for this type of group conversation. But as what I've written through the years that I've been writing the employment law blog that I write, it's that leaders lead by example. People will follow the leader, right? And if you're gonna say that people should be doing that, I felt like it was important for us to do it too.
Right. And they communicate as well. I mean, they talk the talk and walk the walk. And, you mentioned some of the attendees in these sessions. I mean, this is all forms of leadership from our firm. I don't want to get into specifics, but have shown up and spoken and have just formed a very supportive environment for other people who want to share or just listen. There's absolutely no judgment and no knock on anyone who wants to show up. It's meant to be supportive. We are a little over halfway through this employer handbook Zoom office hour, so I wanted to reset. I'm Eric. That's Amy, or over there, wherever you're looking, wherever this shows up. There's Amy. Down there is Justin. We are all partners at Fisher Broyles. Two of us are employment lawyers, and one of us is the smart one. So I want to actually turn to Justin right now and ask him, just piggybacking on some of what Amy said, if you have some other tips of where companies can start or fundamentals that they can utilize to increase employee well-being in their workplace. What do you think?
Sure. One point I wanted to touch on too that Amy mentioned that I think is really important is, in my experience working with teams and their leadership and teams that I led, is you have to earn, I think, trust. And Amy mentioned authenticity. I call it the frequency of authenticity. But if you bring in a new employee on day one and just say, tell me what's going on in your life, that trust probably is not earned. And so people kind of pay attention, and sometimes it takes a little bit of time to build the trust. But just, I guess, for perspective setting, that frequency of authenticity usually comes over time and not immediately. And I saw, like, briefly in the transcription, there was a comment around not wanting to, I think it was not wanting to share something around a lot of people. And that's a great point. At our happy hours, some people choose to get very personal, others try to keep it wave tops. But I think the point, one of the points of it is when you cross that threshold of vulnerability with whatever you're comfortable sharing, you're not alone. There's other people who can relate to exactly or something very similar to what you're going through. And there's just something powerful that happens when you realize it, that you're not navigating something alone. And so, Eric, on the fundamentals, I love talking about this, and I'll offer two. One of the things that I find interesting is when you look at a world-class artist, musician, professional athlete, Navy SEAL, you see them doing these extraordinarily difficult things because that's what the media likes to focus on, but people tend to gloss over the fundamentals. And I had coffee with a transitioning SEAL buddy, and he said to me, which was profound from my perspective, is like, listen, and this was a guy who had served on SEAL Team 6 and done some pretty impressive things. He said, you know what, we're really not that great at anything, but we're brilliant in the basics. You could pop a SEAL in any team and they would know what to do because the fundamentals are drilled in. And here with mental health, no one teaches us the fundamentals. We just wait until something happens and then expect to have this very complex ability to navigate it. And so two of the points that I've observed over the years for the fundamentals that I've applied and distilled down from the military and Deepak, number one, I think, is learning how to be present and honest with ourselves without judgment. So learning how to be present and honest with ourselves without judgment. Meditation is just one of many tools that isn't there's a guy, Jay Shetty, who I love. And he, I think it was him, but the quote's something along the lines of meditation is a truth teller, not a painkiller. And I thought that was really important because meditation helps create the space to be honest with ourselves, with how we're feeling. And to me, that helps prevent the buildup from happening, rather than taking 10, 15 minutes after there's a really challenging, experience with your child, and moving on and pretending it didn't happen. Actually creating the space. It doesn't have to be meditation. It can be by taking a walk. It can be by doing so many different things, but there's magic that happens when, I'll speak for myself, when I've learned how to be honest with myself about how difficult something is, rather than telling myself a story or distracting myself that it shouldn't be this hard or I shouldn't feel what I felt. So point one is, again, finding the resources and tools and having the courage to be honest with ourselves about how we feel without judgment. Second one, I think, and this is kind of a sticky one, but I'm going to share with it, and you cannot invite me back, Eric, is fear, and the things that are really hard. To me, there's almost like an electric fence around certain issues where when you think about them, your body will have a reaction. And behind those doors, there's often, a beautiful learning opportunity. So I think the things that are the most difficult or that we're afraid of, having compassionate curiosity and looking behind them, there's usually something there. When people are triggered, there's very difficult moments, but it's usually not just about that. There's usually other stuff that's been building up. And so rather than continuing to kind of have that fear or start the cycle of things being really, really hard, kind of flipping the script on that and having curiosity about, okay, what's behind that door? There's a reason that this is really hard, and it won't get like too woo-woo on the, on our session now, but it's usually not about work. And it's usually not about the thing that happened. There's a lot more that meets the eye over the courses of our lives, and starting to approach that with curiosity tends to improve, outcomes and how people process day to day.
So there's a question that just came in, and I want to toss this right to you, Justin.
Sure.
How do we equip employees with these fundamentals, right? How much, I guess, and I'll add to that. So the question was, how do we equip these employees with these fundamentals or basics? But my add-on to that is, how as leaders, right, can we bestow that upon our workforce and get them to buy in to what we're selling, so to speak?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that almost every company nowadays will have some variation of work-life balance, or maybe that's shifted with COVID. But if that was true and companies were living that, we wouldn't be having these conversations around how difficult mental health is in the workplace, and the numbers wouldn't be what they are. So I think that it has to come from the top down. And when you look at leadership, like Amy mentioned, if they're not bought into this and just I like to think of it as mission, vision, and values for a company. If seeing people for who they are and realizing that they're not just the commodity that walks in the front door, if leaders aren't living that, it's not going to trickle down to management and beyond. So I think that the leaders need to have buy-in that if you're not going to take care of your people, you're going to pay the price for it, whether it's in lawsuits or turnover or not meeting mission and hitting outcomes. And so it really comes down to, again, it's another example, Eric, of the importance of fundamentals, right? What are the values of the company? Are the leaders standing behind that? And then if it's not starting when people get onboarded, for example, and just say, listen, we realize that you have a life outside of the office. Things may come up. If they do, you don't have to hide it. You don't have to tell us either, but let us know how we can help. right? People, I want to stand the concept of having an open door policy, and kind of call it out. I don't think leaders should sit and wait. I think leaders should go out there like Amy does and talk to the people and, their people and find out what's going on. So
Agreed.
I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, I can help with that. I can help with that. I can give you a list. I know there are a lot of HR people on the phone and people love lists. I mean, the first is what we've been talking about, which is ending the stigma that surrounds mental health, which really is so critical. And the most effective way to overcome the stigma is for leadership to start the conversation about it, about mental well-being. Number two, gather information, right? Gather input, understand how your work environment is impacting employees' mental health. You can talk to your people. A lot of the times humans are promoted to management for reasons that have nothing to do with their ability to manage. And, they have to be able to ask employees about workload, flexibility, culture, and really listen and understand the answers about what people are saying. You want to evaluate, this is number three, if you still like the numbers, you want to evaluate that workplace culture to see if it's supportive of employees' mental health. You have a checklist, and I can give you absolutely a checklist. You want to make employees comfortable seeking accommodations, which is really done by emphasizing that employees don't need to disclose their diagnosis as part of a request for an accommodation or to initiate the FMLA process. Audits are always helpful. I know a lot of you do wage audits and things. Sure. If you email me, Daniela, I'll send you the list. It's really coming from a lot of things that I've dealt with. Audit your company resources about mental health issues, and really do a review of your EAP, your hotlines, your wellness programs. What do you have? What are the resources to which you point your employees? Promote your resources. Don't just send out your EAP once. Send it out multiple times in a year. Remind employees that there are mental health resources that your organization offers. Training, which we say all the time, training. Provide training to supervisors, to managers, to recognize when an employee may be requesting an accommodation, because sometimes it's hard to see, right? You may not always know. Your managers may not, be equipped for that. Understand your work from home policy. Just because somebody worked from home during COVID doesn't necessarily mean they still get to. Make sure your policies and procedures kind of mirror what you're trying to do in the workplace, and ask for help when you need it. There are privacy laws, depending on where you are. California and Virginia both have very stringent privacy laws. Understand managers should not ask for specifics about mental health issues like we were talking about. They should be getting HR involved. And finally, kind of hearkening back to number one and what Justin and I and you, Eric, have been talking about the whole time, is really just be there, be around, be visible, communicate, ask if is there something I can do to help. If an employee's performance suddenly drops off or they seem absent-minded, know your teams, follow up, ask hard questions, and document. The EPLI lawyer in me has to say, that's just a mix between an employment lawyer and a litigator. Document everything.
Yes. Having given my fair share of presentations recently on managers and documenting.
Yes.
I concur.
Same.
I concur. We've got about 10 minutes left. We've got material that we can run through to get through the final 10 minutes, but I want to make sure that we get to some audience questions if you have them. So if you have those questions, please put them up in the chat. I see one from earlier. I'm going to try to go chronologically. There was a question for Justin. The Air Force has a pre-flight process for pilots where they discuss their personal risks that day. So someone might say something like, I had a big fight with my wife and I'm really stressed today, or the baby was up all night crying and I'm not 100%. They do it for safety reasons prior to flying. But could this type of process have a place in the workplace to help connect with well-being concerns or issues?
I love the question, and thank you for whoever asked it. I think absolutely. It's the reality, in my opinion, is that there are some boundaries at work that have to be respected, because it's a usually for-profit entity that has to accomplish something. And so I just want to be clear that I don't believe that the workplace is the appropriate venue to seek mental health treatment or anything like that. That's outside of it. I know that's not what you're asking in the question. But that issue, I think, is a perfect example of if a pilot raises their hand and said they were up all night screaming and arguing with their wife, they'll probably be grounded for the day. And if that happens, there's fear around, just, I guess, career advancement, I'll call it. And I think that's a great analogy to what happens in the workplace. People don't want to raise their hand and share because they're afraid of the repercussions. And I don't think that there's a one size fits all answer there. I think it depends on which metric we're talking about. Are we talking about
that?
You just gave the employment lawyer answer. I love that. That's all
I think
depends.
If we're talking about getting the job or mission done, that has a few different considerations than the personal aspect of taking care of our people, which has a different, few different considerations than if you are the individual. So to answer your question directly, I love the idea of managers and leaders creating this space, especially if it's like, is there anything going on that's going to prevent you from on Friday taking this assignment from the question someone asked all weekend? And it's never easy to say, I'm sorry, but I have something going on, like personally, because you feel like you're letting the team down. However, if the culture is the right one at the company, they will understand. That it's that these life things pop up. So
Right.
I think it would be great if companies had those check-ins, but there's obviously differences between flying an aircraft, with extreme challenges the night before, then, coming in and sitting at a desk. And so I think it just has to match the scenario.
And I think Justin is touching on some of those legal considerations you and I were talking about, Eric, in terms of like, when I suspect somebody has a disability that they haven't talked about, I really open that up with objective facts that I see and that causes me to suspect it. And then I say, I notice XYZ. I notice you were really quiet. You were unusually quiet in this morning's meeting. Is there anything going on? Is everything okay?
Right.
That type of thing.
Or how can we help you? How can we,
Is there anything I can
notice
do?
you're struggling at XYZ tasks. How
Right.
can we help you improve? What can we do for you?
Exactly.
Right? And that may bridge to a conversation of,
Exactly.
well, I'm going through this emotionally, or they could have a physical ailment, or they could have an issue at home with a loved one who is suffering through a serious health condition, which could trigger the need to offer FMLA. So we're not directly prying into their personal lives. And again,
Right.
the workplace, that's not.
You want to be careful.
Yeah.
That's why HR should do it. You want to be careful not to say, well, are you depressed? Do you have clinical depression? You don't want to say that. But to Natasha's point, and I know Natasha, that's why I'm calling her out. When you see somebody working 20 hours a day, like that would ping me. That would be a red flag to me. And I would probably say to that person, if I knew they were working 20 hours a day, what's going on? Are you okay? Feel like maybe that's really difficult. Is this something we should talk about? That type of thing.
Right.
It's opening the conversation.
So there are a couple of other questions in the chat. We can get through these. Someone asked if a company does this, and I think what the question where it was getting at was, we're talking about kind of this open space, and we're talking to employees, and the conversation veers into mental health and well-being, and someone divulges that they're suffering through some mental health issues. If difficult behavior or performance issues persevere, or the employee's mental health issues are impacting coworkers, what's the next step? I'll throw that out to you, Amy. I guess there are a bunch of questions there. So
that really, is on the line of legal advice, of course. And as Eric and I know, and as EEO guidance says, a disability doesn't trump performance and conduct standards. You can still have performance standards in your workplace. Establishing whether somebody has a disability, if it's invisible, right? Because so many of these mental health issues we're talking about are invisible disabilities. You want to find out whether they can still perform the essential functions of the job with or without accommodations, right? So you say you provide your reasonable accommodation, you've modified some policies, you've given the person a flexible standard, and their conduct is still a problem. That's something to examine, because it's not a reasonable accommodation if it causes an undue hardship on the business. An undue hardship is like a significant strain on operations or a very high financial burden or something similar to that. So it's tricky, right? You definitely want to talk to counsel on that one, right? Because it's always tricky when there's a disability, whether or not you're accommodating it. And you are going to discipline or terminate that person because they're wreaking havoc in the workplace.
Yeah. There was one other question, and I want to give both of you a chance to give some closing thoughts and plug whatever it is you'd like to plug. The final question that I want to get to was, when you're having conversations with employees about mental health issues, or frankly, any medical issues, where should those conversations, if they're, let's say, over email or Slack or whatever, the documented conversation, where should that go? It should go in the medical file. Someone asked, should it go in the medical file? It should go in the medical file.
Yes.
It should not go in the employee's personnel file.
It's confidential. It's protected by the ADA.
Well, we are almost at the top of the hour, and we had a very sticky audience today, which is great, which is kudos and credit. I didn't do anything. And my wonderful guests, Amy, Justin, thank you so much for being here for this hour and spending some time with our wonderful audience. Justin, anything any closing thoughts? You want to plug anything? Are you doing any performances this weekend? Where can we see it? How can we get in touch with you?
No, thank you. I guess the parting thought would be, I don't think as leaders, our responsibility is to fix necessarily. If someone has a challenge or they're sharing it, it's to support them, both for whether it's the mission or the company purpose, or to guide them to resources. So I just want to make that distinction as well, unless you happen to be a mental health professional. But that piece is important. And then please feel free to reach out. I know a few folks connected on LinkedIn already. Thank you. If you know any families impacted by autism, Neurolux is getting up and running, and we've gotten some amazing feedback. And other than that, thank you both so much for having me.
And Amy?
I want to say thank you to you for really facilitating my practice and my ability to do the work that I do, and to Justin as well. Because he's just amazing. And we talk about these things all the time offline. Mental health has really always been a passion for me, really, for the last, I would say, 20 years. And I think what Justin said is exactly right, and it's especially important for us as lawyers. Lawyers, are like, we can help you, we can solve your problem. That's not what we do in the workplace when we notice a mental health issue. Our job is not to be a doctor. It's not to give medical advice or healthcare advice. It's really to say, look, we're here. And I think our obligations as leaders is to open the door. That's really how I think of it. I have found that when I open the door, when I communicate authentically with people, I share my journey, and engage and discuss some of the things, I feel that other people do too. And it's such an everybody wins situation. So I love that. I love being an employment lawyer because I get to do this as part of my practice as well.
Thank you both. Thank you to the audience. And let's plug next week. We'll be back. We have another one of these. I don't know why we keep doing them. You guys keep coming, so we got to keep doing them. 10/28, October 28th. My guest will be David Moll, who is
Nicholas.
an employment lawyer at Jackson Lewis.
Yeah.
He's in-house at a huge company in Pennsylvania. We're going to talk about leave rights and accommodations in hybrid and fully remote workplaces. So it may just be 5 of us. I don't know if that appeals to all of you. I think it would. But we're talking about leave rights and accommodations in hybrid and fully remote workplaces. I will post a link to register in the blog post on Monday and on LinkedIn. And again, this is going up on YouTube. I'll post some links there as well. Thank you, everyone, for turning out. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Justin, and everyone. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you all so much.
All right.